The night Neo threw my clothes out and told me I was too useless to keep, I stood in the rain broken. What he didn't know was that I had just signed papers that would change everything. Within 24 hours, the world would call my name. And Neo would realize he had lost the one thing money could never buy back, me. Amira had always believed that love meant sacrifice. She gave up her own dreams, her savings, and even her health just to support Neo's ambitions. Every night she stayed up late, making sure he had food, ironing his clothes before work, and listening to him talk about his big plans. She thought her efforts mattered, but to Neo, they were invisible. The night of his family dinner proved it. Amira walked in with a warm smile, carrying the dish she had prepared with care, hoping to feel accepted. But as soon as she sat down, Neo's relatives began asking questions. Questions about what she contributed, about her role in his success. Instead of defending her, Neo leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said words that cut her deeper than a knife. He laughed and told everyone that Amira did nothing, that she was just dead weight, that she was too useless to keep. The room went silent, but his words echoed louder than thunder in her ears. Some relatives chuckled nervously, others looked away, but no one stood up for her. Amira's hands shook under the table as she forced back tears. She wanted to scream, to remind them of the countless nights she worked double shifts to help pay the rent, of the times she stood by Neo when he had nothing, of the sacrifices she made without ever asking for praise. But the humiliation was too heavy, pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Neo continued, mocking her as if she were not even sitting there. To him, she was just a shadow, someone to belittle so he could shine brighter in front of his family. Amira lowered her gaze, her heart breaking piece by piece, as she realized she had been giving everything to a man who saw her as nothing. At that table, surrounded by people who treated her silence as weakness, Amira's soul screamed for freedom. She smiled faintly to hide her pain, but inside she made a promise. This would be the last time Neo ever embarrassed her like that. He thought she was useless, but soon, the world would see just how wrong he was. Amira went back to the house that night with her heart shattered into pieces. The humiliation at the dinner table replayed in her mind over and over, each word from Neo stabbing her deeper. She opened the bedroom door and looked around the place she had once called home. Every corner reminded her of sacrifices she had made, the sleepless nights, the dreams she had put on hold just to see Neo succeed. But now it all felt empty. Without a single word, she reached for her small suitcase hidden under the bed and began to pack. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the finality of her decision. For years, she had stayed and endured, hoping he would one day see her worth. But tonight proved that he never would. She folded her clothes neatly, one by one. Even though her vision was blurred with tears, she picked up the few belongings she had bought with her own money, leaving behind everything tied to him. The storm outside roared, but inside, she was quieter than ever. She didn't shout. She didn't beg him to stop her. She didn't leave notes or explanations. Silence was her answer. Neo, busy laughing with his friends in the living room, didn't even notice that she was leaving. To him, she was already nothing. But inside her bag, between her clothes and documents, lay something that would soon turn her entire life around. A confidential contract she had been working on for months in secret. While Neo was too busy belittling her, she had been building a dream no one knew about. That contract held the signatures of international investors, the future of a tech company she had created in the shadows, a vision she had nurtured alone. It was her hidden weapon, her unspoken strength. With the suitcase zipped, she wiped her tears and took one last look at the room. Her chest felt heavy, but her steps were firm. She opened the door and stepped into the stormy night, the rain soaking her clothes instantly. Yet for the first time in years, she felt free. The cold drops washed away her pain as if the sky itself was cleansing her heart. She walked without looking back, without fear, without hesitation. No one in that house knew it yet, but the woman they called useless had just walked out carrying a future worth millions. And this silent exit would be the beginning of Neo's biggest regret. Long before the humiliation and the stormy night she walked away, Amira had been living a secret life filled with endless struggle. By day, she worked at a local cafe, serving customers with a tired but genuine smile. By night, she cleaned offices, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. Most people who saw her thought she was just another young woman trying to survive. But beneath her quiet appearance burned a fire no one could see. After finishing her shifts, when the world was asleep, Amira would sit at a small wooden desk in their cramped apartment, her laptop glowing in the darkness. That was where her real work began. Amira had always dreamed of creating something powerful, something that would change lives. While Neo dismissed her ideas as foolish, she stayed up night after night sketching plans, writing codes, and connecting with mentors online. Her idea grew into a tech startup designed to help small African businesses connect to global markets. She knew the challenges people faced because she had lived them, and she wanted to build a bridge that could change everything. The journey wasn't easy. Many nights, she fought sleep with cups of strong tea, her body aching from long hours of physical labor. Her eyes would blur over the screen, but she refused to quit. There were times when she couldn't even afford internet data, so she skipped meals just to save enough to keep her dream alive. Each sacrifice was a seed she planted for a future no one believed in, except her. Neo never noticed. To him, Amira was just tired all the time because she was lazy. He never knew that while he slept peacefully, she was having calls with potential investors from across the world. He never knew that the reason she was often quiet was because her mind was busy building something bigger than both of them. She kept it hidden, not out of fear, but because she knew he would laugh at her and crush her spirit if he found out. Months of silent hard work finally began to bear fruit. One evening, as she presented her idea to a group of international investors over a video call, she saw their faces light up with interest. They were impressed, not just by the idea, but by her determination and deep understanding of the market. For the first time, she felt the weight of her sleepless nights lifting, replaced with hope. They signed a confidential contract with her, one that promised an investment worth millions. Amira closed her laptop that night with tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from quiet victory. No one knew what she carried inside her, an empire in the making. She was still the same woman Neo called useless, but in truth, she was building a future that would soon make the whole world know her name. The night Amira left, Neo barely noticed the silence she left behind. He thought she had gone to sulk, maybe even to run back later with apologies. But when he realized her suitcase was missing, instead of worry or regret, he felt relief. To him, her absence was a gift. The next morning, he gathered his closest friends at a lounge in the city. Sitting at the center of the table with a drink in his hand, he spoke loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Neo boasted that he had finally freed himself from a woman who brought nothing but shame. He called Amira dead weight, saying she had no ambition, no future, nothing to offer. His friends laughed with him, feeding his pride, while he painted himself as a man who had cut loose a burden. He told stories about how she was always tired, how she never dressed fancy, how she never matched his vision of a successful partner. He twisted her sacrifices into jokes, turning her sleepless nights into signs of laziness, her quiet strength into weakness. Neo was confident, almost glowing with arrogance, as if discarding Amira had upgraded his life. He believed he could now chase after wealthier women, women who would match the image he wanted to show off to the world. But behind those loud laughs and careless words, Neo was blind to the storm that was already building outside his little circle. He had no idea that Amira, the woman he called useless, was hours away from being on every major headline. While he was bragging, global news platforms were preparing to announce her company's record-breaking $87 million contract. Investors were ready to unveil her as the brilliant founder of a startup that was set to change African business forever. As Neo poured another drink and bragged about being single, strangers online were beginning to share Amira's name. Her picture, once ignored, was about to flood timelines. The woman he mocked was about to be celebrated as a visionary. His words, which he thought made him look powerful, would soon be replayed as proof of his cruelty. The same friends who laughed with him would soon be whispering behind his back, wondering how he could throw away someone so extraordinary. Neo leaned back in his chair that night, completely unaware that the world was shifting around him. He thought he had won by letting Amira go, but the cruel aftermath of his arrogance was already on its way. And soon, it would not be Amira living in his shadow, it would be him living in hers. The morning after Neo's cruel bragging, the world woke up to a different story. Amira's story, Across television screens, business websites, and social media platforms, one name appeared again and again: Amira. The quiet woman who had walked away in the rain was now the face of a groundbreaking announcement. Her tech company, built in silence and sacrifice, had just secured an $87 million contract with a leading international firm. The deal was not only historic in size but also revolutionary in vision, promising to connect thousands of small African businesses to global markets. News anchors spoke with admiration, describing her as a visionary who had turned struggle into innovation. Headlines carried powerful phrases, from useless to unstoppable, the woman who refused to break, Africa's new tech queen. Photos of Amira at investor meetings, standing tall in her modest but confident style, spread like wildfire. The internet caught fire with her story, and within hours, hashtags celebrating her were trending worldwide. On Twitter, people shared clips of her speeches about determination and resilience. On Instagram, her smiling face appeared in countless posts with words of praise. Even LinkedIn, usually quiet about personal struggles, was flooded with professionals calling her an inspiration. Every platform became a stage, and Amira was finally in the spotlight she had earned through years of hidden struggle. Meanwhile, in the same city where Neo had mocked her, whispers began to spread. Friends who had laughed at his jokes just the night before were now glued to their phones, watching videos of Amira being interviewed by international media. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with power as she spoke about her mission to empower local businesses. She talked about believing in herself when no one else did, about turning nights of exhaustion into mornings of victory. People listened, inspired, some even moved to tears. Neo's words from the dinner, calling her useless, suddenly resurfaced online. Someone who had been at the table had secretly recorded him, and now the clip was circulating alongside news of Amira's success. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. The man who mocked her versus the woman who had just signed an $87 million deal. The internet quickly took sides, and Neo became the symbol of short-sightedness, while Amira became the symbol of resilience. In just a single day, everything had changed. Amira, once dismissed and underestimated, had become a global figure of strength. The woman who had been told she was too useless to keep had proven that her worth was greater than anyone could ever imagine. And the world was applauding her louder than Neo's insults could ever echo. As Amira's face filled screens and timelines, the internet dug deeper into her story. People wanted to know everything about the woman who had risen from silence to sign an $87 million contract. And then it happened, the video. Someone who had been at the family dinner uploaded the recording of Neo's cruel words. In the clip, he could be seen laughing as he called Amira useless and dead weight, mocking her in front of his relatives. The timing was explosive. The video spread across platforms at the same moment the news of her contract was trending. Suddenly, the world saw the full picture. The woman who was humiliated and abandoned was the same woman now celebrated as a global success. Twitter lit up first. Users paired his insults with headlines about her victory, creating side-by-side posts that quickly went viral. From useless to unstoppable became more than a headline. It became a movement. Millions shared their own stories of being underestimated, tagging Amira and thanking her for inspiring them. TikTok creators used the video of Neo's insults to make clips showing the contrast with Amira's success, each one gaining thousands, even millions of views. Comments poured in like waves. People called Neo a fool for throwing away a woman who had been building an empire in silence. Others said he had become the symbol of what happens when you fail to value someone's worth. His name trended too, but not in the way he had hoped. Where Amira's name was linked to hope, inspiration, and strength, his was linked to shame, regret, and ridicule. Friends who had once laughed at his jokes stopped answering his calls. Strangers confronted him online, leaving comments on his pictures, mocking him for losing the very woman he had looked down on. His reputation, once built on pride and false confidence, began to collapse brick by brick. He had tried to paint himself as a man who moved forward by leaving her behind, but the world now saw him for what he really was, a man blinded by arrogance. Meanwhile, Amira remained silent through the storm, letting the world speak for her. She didn't clap back, she didn't post insults, and she didn't waste time addressing him. Her silence was powerful, because the truth was already too clear. Every headline, every hashtag, Every video reminded the world who she was. Neo had thought discarding her was freedom, but now, he was trapped in the shadow of his own cruelty. Amira, the woman he once called useless, had become unstoppable, and nothing could erase that. As the internet turned against him and Amira's name rose higher every day, Neo felt the ground beneath him slipping away. His friends avoided him, his business contacts began to distance themselves, and even his own family looked at him with disappointment. The video of his cruel words had painted him as a villain, while Amira's success painted her as a hero. For the first time, Neo realized what he had lost. In a panic, he tried to reach her. He called her phone countless times, left long messages begging her to talk, and even sent emails claiming it had all been a mistake. He wrote that he hadn't meant what he said, that he had been under pressure, that he still loved her. But Amira never responded. While Neo drowned in regret, Amira's life moved forward at lightning speed. She was no longer the quiet woman sitting at a dinner table, waiting to be noticed. She was now standing in front of flashing cameras at global press conferences, her name introduced with applause. Investors flew in from different countries just to meet her, and every boardroom she entered erupted in respect. She walked into meetings with grace and confidence, presenting her vision to some of the most powerful people in business. Her ideas were welcomed, her voice was heard, and her leadership was celebrated. Everywhere she went, she was treated as a woman of value, a woman of vision. Magazines wanted her on their covers, journalists wanted her interviews, and students wanted her advice. She had become a role model for young women across Africa and beyond, a living example of how resilience could turn rejection into triumph. Amira barely had time to breathe between conferences, panels, and interviews, yet she carried herself with calmness and dignity. She had no energy left for the past, and certainly not for Neo. Neo, on the other hand, couldn't escape his shame. Every headline about Amira was another reminder of what he had thrown away. He showed up at places he thought she might be, hoping to catch her attention, but security always turned him away. He watched from afar as the woman he once mocked became untouchable. The tables had turned completely. Where he once spoke over her, now he had no voice. Where he once dismissed her, now the world celebrated her. And where he once believed she was useless, she now stood as living proof that he had been wrong all along. The grand ballroom glittered with lights as important guests filled the charity gala. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities, and journalists gathered, but the spotlight that night was on Amira. She had been invited as the guest of honor, not only for her $87 million contract, but also for the way she had become a symbol of hope for thousands of people. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, she walked in. With quiet confidence, her presence commanding the room without effort. Cameras flashed, microphones reached out, and everyone wanted to hear from the woman who had risen from nothing to global recognition. But in the corner of the hall, another figure appeared, Neo. He had not been invited, but desperation drove him there. He thought if he could just stand before her, if he could just say the right words in front of the cameras, maybe people would forgive him. Maybe Amira would forgive him. He straightened his suit, put on a forced smile, and waited for the right moment. As the event progressed, Amira was called to the stage to give a speech. The hall fell silent as she stepped up to the microphone, her poise and calmness making her look every bit like the leader she had become. Neo's heart pounded. He thought she might acknowledge him, maybe even give him a chance to show the world that he was sorry. But Amira had a different plan. She looked out at the audience, her eyes shining with quiet strength. "Life will test us," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Some people will call us worthless. Some will try to break us, to make us believe we are nothing. But sometimes, being pushed aside is what gives us the strength to rise. We all carry a fire within us, and when the world doubts us, that fire burns even brighter." The room erupted in applause, but she raised her hand gently, and silence returned. "To every woman, every man who has ever been told they were not enough, remember this. Your value does not depend on who sees it. It depends on you. And when you believe in yourself, the same people who laughed at you will one day watch you succeed." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even with tears in their eyes. Neo stood frozen at the back, his face pale. She hadn't mentioned his name, yet every word felt like it was directed at him. In that moment he realized the truth. Amira had already moved far beyond him, and he was nothing more. then a shadow in her story. Amira's success did not stop at one contract. It was only the beginning. With the $87 million investment secured, she expanded her company into new regions, opening offices in cities that had never seen opportunities like this before. Her vision was clear. She wanted to build a platform that gave small businesses a chance to reach the world. But more than that, she wanted to give opportunities to people who, like her, had once been overlooked and underestimated. When the time came to hire, Amira didn't look for the loudest resumes or the most polished candidates. Instead, she searched for people with stories like hers, women who had been called weak, too poor, or too unimportant to matter. She hired single mothers who had been rejected from jobs because of their circumstances, young girls who had been denied education but taught themselves skills in secret, and women who carried scars of humiliation yet still dared to dream. She gave them not only jobs but also respect, training, and a seat at the table where decisions were made. Her company quickly became more than just a business. It became a movement. People admired the technology she created, but they respected even more the way she lifted others as she rose. Interviews about her work spread across Africa and beyond, and her name was no longer tied only to one contract, but to a revolution of hope. Amira was no longer the woman in the shadows. She was the light that others followed. In schools, young girls whispered her name with admiration. Teachers used her story as an example of resilience and courage. If Amira could rise after being called useless, they told their students, so can you. Girls who had once felt invisible began to see themselves as powerful. They wrote her letters, thanking her for showing them that worth does not come from someone else's approval, but from believing in yourself. Some even started small businesses of their own, inspired by her journey. Amira traveled across countries, speaking at conferences, mentoring youth programs, and sharing her story openly. She didn't hide the pain, the sleepless nights, or the humiliation she endured, because she knew those were the parts that made her story real. Every time she spoke, audiences rose to their feet, not just because of her achievements, but because of the strength she carried with grace. Her rise was no longer about proving Neo wrong. It was about proving every underestimated person right. She had turned her scars into stepping stones, her silence into strength, and her rejection into a global symbol of empowerment. Across Africa and beyond, Amira became more than a name. She became hope itself. The cameras were on, the lights bright, and millions of people across the world were watching. Amira sat gracefully in the studio chair, her presence calm yet powerful. The interviewer leaned forward with the question everyone had been waiting for. Amira, what do you think now about the man who once called you useless? The studio went silent. It was the kind of silence that held 1,000 breaths, waiting for her answer. Amira's lips curved into a gentle smile. She didn't rush. She didn't let anger or bitterness rise in her voice. Instead, she spoke with a quiet strength that carried more weight than any harsh word could. Sometimes, she said softly, being thrown away is the best thing that can happen, because it forces you to discover your own worth. And once you know your worth, no one can ever throw you away again. The interviewer blinked, stunned by the depth of her words. For a moment, the whole studio was frozen, and then the applause began. Slow at first, then louder, until it filled every corner of the room. Viewers at home felt it too. Her words struck something deep, something true. She wasn't just answering a question. She was giving the world a lesson in strength. Clips of the interview spread instantly. People replayed that single moment over and over, sharing it across social media with captions like, "Know your worth." And Amira said it best. Young girls who had followed her journey cried tears of pride. Mothers shared her message with their daughters, and men who had once underestimated women sat in silence, realizing the weight of what they had seen. And somewhere, far from the spotlight, Neo sat alone. The man who once laughed at her, who once believed she was nothing, now had no words left. His name was fading, while hers was shining brighter than ever. He was the silence in the background of her triumph, a reminder of how wrong he had been. Amira didn't need revenge, and she didn't need to prove anything more. Her life had already done that for her. Her final word wasn't about him. It was about everyone watching who had ever been doubted, discarded, or called worthless. She had turned her pain into power, and now the whole world applauded not just her success, but her wisdom. In that moment, Amira wasn't just a business leader. She was a symbol of hope, a living proof that being rejected doesn't end your story. It can be the very beginning of it.